The Wheeling Plan Commission meeting for Thursday, May 16th, 2013 is called to order. Please stand for the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Secretary, roll call, please.
Commissioner Dorband.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson, I am here. Commissioner Powers.
Here.
Commissioner Schaaf.
Present.
Commissioner Stylen.
Here.
And Chairman Raffato.
Here. Mr. Jennings, any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes this evening.
We have no citizens here for citizen concerns and comments, so let's move to consent items. SCBA 13-8, Party Fantasy 7150 Capitol Avenue, appearance approval of the wall sign for those in the audience. This was before us a month ago. Party Fantasy is going into the building where Garden Fresh had their corporate headquarters. It is an indoor, one of the main attractions is an indoor go-kart track, but they're electric go-karts, and they have some party rooms, and they have game rooms, and a whole bunch of other things for kids. So do I hear a motion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
We have a motion made by Commissioner Stylen, seconded by Commissioner Johnson. Please take the roll.
Commissioner Stylen.
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson, I vote yes. Commissioner Dorband.
Yes.
Commissioner Powers.
Yes.
Commissioner Schaaf.
Yes.
And Chairman Raffato.
Yes. Moving on, item number 7, items for review. We have none. 8 items, approval of minutes. We don't have any to approve tonight. Number 9, other business workshop items. Mr. Jennings, we have 3 items tonight, landscaping topics, zoning code amendments, and review of land use applications.
I'm going to switch
Okay,
and speak
thank you.
from that end for you. Thank you. At last week's meeting, we went through the Plan Commission's priority list. The days following the meeting, we decided to go ahead and start up taking the first few items off the list. For the most part, we went in the order of priority. We took a couple of items that were high priority, and we had already had some significant work done on them. So we discussed with the chair and agreed that that would be a good way to use our time this week. The first item, landscaping. We've got a item going in front of the board. There's a consensus of the commission on 2 occasions to make a change to Title 12. We've given you a copy of what the board will receive. This would update the section to require a property owner to maintain landscaping in accordance with the most recently approved plan, regardless of whether or not there was a building permit associated with that plan. As you know, not every landscape plan is associated with a building permit, so this would match the intent of the commission if this were to be approved on Monday night. So that's what's been sent onto the board. The other item related to this, you have in front of you this sheet, the permit acceptance agreement. The yellow highlighted text are the staff suggestions. We have talked to the Director of Community Development. He is conceptually in agreement with changing this sheet. We haven't worked out all the details, but so far this is what we're drafting, so that someone signing this agreement would be acknowledging more explicitly that the various plans associated historically with the property would be adhered to. Are there any questions on these? Is this more or less the right track? Yes, go ahead.
I got a question about the Title 12.
Yes.
Is there any way that, you sent out some other handouts to us prior to this, and a couple of those landscaping manuals, there's a thing that says once somebody's been cited, they have like 6 months to replace their plants or whatever. Is there anything we can put in this ordinance, or how do we enforce it that if somebody violates this or they're cited, to give them some kind of say you have 6 months to fix it, or you're going to be you're going to be fined or something? Can we meet that up again, Eddie?
We currently have elsewhere in the code under property maintenance. We currently have the ability, when you write a citation, to give somebody a certain number of days to rectify the problem. So I don't think we need anything beyond that. I can find it I don't know off the top of my head exactly where it is, but our property maintenance inspectors have the ability, when they write a citation, to pick a deadline, a reinspection deadline. Most of our citations follow a pattern of notice of violation prior to citation, so they typically have a window under the notice to resolve it before it's even considered a ticket.
Okay.
We tend to try for voluntary compliance before we get into the fines.
And the reason why it's not here is that it's in a different section.
Yes.
With, what's that section called? It's,
Zoning, it's
yeah, it's the zoning,
all scattered throughout zoning.
yeah.
There's a couple of places. Chapter 15, or Title 15 has one, Title 12, and then the property maintenance inspectors deal with it more regularly than I do.
Right.
So I'm just not familiar enough.
In those handouts that you gave us from other communities, I was really impressed with one that said, hey, these are the good times to plant things, and even though we make approvals, you shouldn't plant trees until this time of the year, or shrubs that time of year. And the thing that really impressed me, it said, do not under any circumstance plant trees during the summer months, and I thought that was a real good thing to put in there. And while I'm talking, I might as well just say that there was one document in there that I was really impressed with, the one that had landscaping as a separate and complete ordinance. I went through Title 21, and landscaping is scattered throughout the 200-page document. We've got pieces over in other titles as well. It might be worth thinking about making a landscaping ordinance and put everything in one place.
I would say 2006, those of you who were on the commission at that time might remember this. We did actually draft an overhaul of Title 12, and that was the intent. It kind of got lost in the details. We brought it back, I think, 2 or 3 times for revision, and we ultimately, I think, went with something simpler, a couple of minor changes here and there. So we did at one point attempt an overhaul. I think if we were to do something like that again, if the commission and the board wanted to do that, pull it out of 19 and have all of the regulations within 12, and then by reference in 19 reference them. So I think that's beyond our capability based on our experience with the last time we tried it. That's probably more of a consultant type of job, would just be my guess.
Well,
Possibly,
maybe,
we could possibly do it, but it'd probably be a consultant job.
I would like to put it on our, it's a good idea. I'd like to put it on our workshop list to discuss a little bit further, and maybe it's something that we discuss with the board also. You know, I'm sure they have other priorities when it comes to our title, you know, our chapters, so, our ordinances, but I think it's a good idea. Was that something that we reviewed? We reviewed as a board?
Believe
Now, that
It
it
was
was,
not
that
requi-
was
it was not
7 years ago,
required.
so.
it was, I believe it came to the commission once or twice, went to the board once or twice. I can't remember how many times with each, but I believe the commission saw it at least once.
Okay, so do you recall what the impediment was?
I think it was, it's been a while, but I think
Yeah.
we just got lost in how detailed some of the requirements, the specifics of some of the requirements. And I think we just, in the end, went with the direction of minor changes to 19, minor changes to 21, and minor changes to 12, and kept it separated out. 12 is trees and vegetation. I mean, that was the reason that we were working on that. But I can try to resurrect the history and see where it ended up.
Yeah, okay, if you could, okay.
Another thing, I think the ordinance is nice, and the permit, I think, meets the objective that I originally had. My only question here is its signature of owner or agent. And my question is, if the agent, whoever it is, signs this, how binding is that to the property owner in general, right? I mean, could the property owner say, well, that was my landscaper, I had no idea that he was committing us to this, or?
The agent in this case, I believe, is binding the property owner. The property owner has to specifically authorize the agent, if it's a general contractor, architect, those are the usual non-owner types who would sign it. I believe they are binding to the owner ultimately. Of course, the owner paying that person, I think, could have reason to have legal action against them if they agreed to something. But I'm not terribly familiar with it.
Okay, good, thank you. Any other questions around Title 12 or the permanent acceptance agreement? No? Okay, let's move on to the brochure for developers. Thank you, Andrew.
Okey-dokey. So the intention of this is to follow up on our last workshop. We had a workshop, I'd like to say January, where staff made an attempt at drafting the skeleton of a brochure. At that meeting, we left, the staff left with some questions about what to do. We didn't feel like we got a consensus one way or the other on how detailed this brochure was going to be. We kind of left it with, well, maybe this is a two-piece where we've got a smaller brochure and then the code itself gets overhauled more comprehensively. So what we've done in an effort to try to focus the discussion, what we've done is handed you a handful of samples, some from this country, some from other countries, some from other municipalities near here, to try to get an idea visually what types of things the commission is interested in seeing in this brochure. As you, I'm sure, noticed, some of these are really long. Our intention isn't really to go through page by page. So if everyone's had a chance to at least skim through these, and you could give us some right track, wrong track sort of direction, things you like that would be how I would envision this part of the discussion going. If it was an overwhelming amount of information, we can also just push this to another workshop and do that sort of consensus at that point.
So you're looking for, you've given us these examples, and you're now saying, okay, what's our next steps? Where do we go from here with our brochure?
Right, this is to actually craft it specific to Wheeling, Zone 5, and our code, that step is a pretty significant undertaking. So the amount of staff time we would have to use to do the real deal is pretty significant. So what we'd like to do is make sure that we're understanding this project the same way before we really start the detailed approach to it. So if there are pieces of these other documents, pages 5 through 10 of this one, that's the right track. That's kind of what we're looking for.
Well, did you raise your hand? Oh, okay, so I thought I saw your, well, Park Ridge looks like just their title, right?
It is their code.
Yeah, it's their code, so that's really not a brochure. Okay,
I think they do have some diagrams in it.
and then so is
St. Charles.
St. Charles, that's their code. The true two landscaping, two brochures really are the first two, right? Is that how you would assess it?
Remember what page that
Mayor?
was?
First three.
First three, I'm sorry, first three. Still haven't figured out how to navigate sometimes in this thing.
I'm off by 100 pages, more or less.
Now, these are fairly long.
Yeah, I guess that's my big question, Andrew. I mean, a lot of these, quote, handbooks or guidelines, whatever they were lots of pages. And do you have the time to put something like that together in a reasonable, is it even possible to ask you to do something like this?
I think, to answer that, first of all, no. But I think what we need to figure out is who's the audience for this brochure and what information are you trying to convey to them? The audience for some of these is going to be a professional landscaper. The audience for some of them, or at least certain segments of it, is not a professional landscaper. It's the business itself. It's what is the base knowledge that you assume your audience has? Are you looking to provide graphics that show, here's how we envision small site landscaping, a couple of examples from this general area using the types of plants that you typically see around here. Things that we look for. Preference toward sustainable planting, preference toward year-round color. So if you're looking for that level of detail, I think we probably could do it. But these documents, no, we don't have the knowledge or the time to do something that you see on most of these.
Would it be possible to say, the one I really liked was the West Jordan landscaping guidelines
I like that one too.
handbook. It was full of pictures and just a little commentary and stuff. Is that something that we could say, over the next 10 years, let's contribute a page here or there to developing something like that, and then take some of the meat of these plans and just build them into title whatever it is, and just be a little bit more pictorial in some of the title documents. The problem is a lot of the information that they have about the trees and stuff is information that's great for us, but a professional landscaper, he probably knows that's the top of his head, and a guy that comes in to develop his property probably really doesn't care, right? What's, of these five, what's the cheapest?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I think this is part of what we're trying to figure out. This exactly is what we're trying to figure out. We talked to Lori Hazel with the Forester about this. This West Jordan was one of the samples that she provided to try to help us narrow our focus. We were talking to her about the staff capacity to do something like this, and the thing that I think she was having the most trouble with was where do you cut off? You know, are we talking about planning specifications for different, you know, how you protect the root ball, or what level of knowledge are you trying to convey? And her opinion of the project was if you're trying to take people from design through installation and maintenance, it cannot be done in a small number of pages. So what if you're trying to give people just the vision, yes, you could probably do that in a small number of pages. So generally speaking, it sounds like the consensus is to have the vision conveyed.
Yes.
And then the code updated to be more descriptive and more thorough, more graphic than what we currently have.
Commissioner Dorbin, is that?
Well, you know, I think there's some really important pieces of that Jordan one that I really liked. You know, if you look at your packet, it's page 123, like it gave percentages in there. And I liked that idea. It gave people a better idea of what was needed. And then I also liked the sign-off sheet. I think that's, let me see, on page 128. And, you know, just pages 123 to 128 were just really interesting. I liked the way they had the sign-off. It was really clear. But I mean, I think that I'd like to see us do maybe a slimmed down version of something and build on it over time. You know, maybe have it like a 3-ring binder type of thing where we can just keep adding stuff to it.
And to that point, if you pull it out of 19, you can more easily do that. Certain codes require public hearing to modify. This is just inside baseball, I guess, but one of the reasons that a lot of our engineering standards are not in the code, in one of the codes that requires a public hearing to modify, is that as standards change, they can swap them out. So something like this might be more appropriate. A design manual, landscape design manual that's referenced as the...
Well, you know, every code we do we have to, does it have to go back and be approved then by the board, or do we have some flexibility on maybe making them like administrative procedures so that we could make minor changes here and there and tweak it?
I think if you pull it out of 19 and just reference it in 19, I think you can tweak it without a public hearing. The question then on if it's in a title, I think the board still has to vote on it. If it comes out of the municipal code and becomes a design manual that's referenced, then I think you can establish the sort of administrative review.
Or is it exhibits?
But then how enforceable is that?
I think it's enforceable. I mean, if this is the direction, we can look into this. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it is enforceable. The engineering standards, once they're adopted by reference like that, I believe they are enforceable. And I can double check that, and if that's something that
I
the
just,
commission would like us to look at.
I like the way that whole one was laid out. I like the way it looked. I like the color pictures. And actually, it was kind of interesting because I was looking at it on the computer thinking, I don't know that we would have to provide a hard copy, do we? I mean, why? Because the computer copy certainly was very good. Why go through the expense of even having to print it out is one of my questions.
I don't think we do. We can certainly have one on hand, but I don't think we have any obligation to make them available on paper. So I can double check that. I can check the enforceability of non-code design manuals. And then I think what we can do, if there's, this is, I think, going to be a multi-workshop issue.
Like one of the things that you know, as things change, trees become less popular or less desirable in an area. That way we could be tweaking it and taking it out. I mean, obviously, we're going to keep backup that we've changed it, but, you know, moving forward, there's going to be things that do get changed from time to time, and rather than have to go through a whole hearing, if we could just have them as exhibits or however they label them, then we could move along a little more quickly, I think, without being so much trouble.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we're looking at putting together really a vision of what we would like our landscaping to be, okay? And somehow incorporating this checklist, the worksheet that was in where's it from?
West Jordan.
West Jordan.
Yeah, I think
Utah.
there's a lot of good paragraphs.
That could be pulled out.
Throughout the
Now,
document.
And maybe that could go into the design document. And then what I heard was pulling out landscaping from Title 19, and putting it into a design statement, and then actually checking also coincidentally with that, the enforceability if we go down that path.
And we can, I just don't know the answer to that now, but
Right.
we can have that. There's two options, basically. The same document can be handled two different ways. At that point, it could be an overhaul of Title 12 or a design manual that's referenced in other titles, depending on enforceability and how the board wants to handle it.
Is everybody clear on that direction that we're going to take? Okay, I see nodding.
What direction are you going to take? Oh, you're looking at both options.
I'm going to look at both of those options. My understanding of that is basically the same document. We're talking about whether it is an overhaul of 12 or it becomes a design manual. What would be produced would be more or less the same thing. It's just a matter of where we put it.
Yes.
And then in addition to that, we're talking about a small brochure, a very small.
Right.
Here's what we're looking for. Just helpful hints, tips for petitioners.
Or even the brochure to reference the document.
You could do, wow, that was good. You could do that in one sentence, though.
Right, yeah.
So then, I would still like to say some type of brochure that they could start with.
Okay.
Yeah, because the thing, in my mind, the thing that you don't want to do is stifle any creativity in the whole process. But then again, we've got some standards that we want to put before you, and we would like you to consider these. But as I was a little confused when you first brought it up, but the same document, either the guidelines or the change in code, it's still the same document.
Well, I was under the impression that one of the items that we were looking for was something that we could hand a developer or a new tenant that's leasing a building that,
Something simple that was,
here's some highlights, here's our vision of what we want to do, and then somewhere within that, reference our design, either title, whatever.
yeah.
It's either a design standard or still part of Title 19. That's,
Yeah, I'm in favor of that.
Yes.
okay. Okay. Good to go?
I guess.
Oh.
The computer knows. Okay. Yes, I think that's good. I think
Is that doable?
It's doable. I think there's a board direction part of this as well.
Right.
So if this is going to be a significant undertaking, we need to figure out between the village manager and the board and our department head, the amount of
Okay.
time we can devote to it. But
But again, I think there were a lot, in all of these documents that Andrew gave us, there were a lot of, a paragraph here, a paragraph there, like Pam said, that really stuck out and said, we should have a statement like this or a guideline
Well, again,
like
okay.
that. Where would we, should we just gather all these little paragraphs together and keep track of them somewhere?
Yes, very simply, yes, because, we need to help them go through five documents, and we all have separate eyes. Let's compile them, put a little folder in Outlook that says landscaping stuff and send it to Andrew, referencing this paragraph, this page from these five, and send them to Andrew and Brooke.
you could even, since they're in this order in this packet, I'd assume that everybody's saved the meeting packet for today. You can reference the page numbers from that PDF and just say, I think pages
Yeah.
79 through 81, specifically pulling out this table, this plant table, specifically pulling out this checklist. That would be fine. And then we can say, okay, this document, when we finish it, is going to need a table of plants, a checklist, and diagrams of small and large, So I think we can work with that, work with our forester to see if together we have the capacity to do this, or if we need to hire somebody to finish it for us.
So you would put a table of plants and trees that were acceptable, and, we wouldn't go and plant something we know wouldn't survive in this type of climate, so there would be like recommended plantings that would be, what a petitioner could come and see, and when we get a landscape plan, and they had this handout, we'd say, yeah, these all look like they're on our acceptable list, per se.
Well, we have a lot of those defined today, helter-skelter around our titles, but I think some of them are no good anymore, and,
Right.
I think we still allow barberry bushes or something.
Okay. I think that we have a pretty good idea of next step.
I did find it interesting in the one from Utah, the Firewise plants. Okay, any other questions about the brochure for developers? No? Okay, cool. Moving on to zoning code amendments. Parking requirements. Mr. Jennings.
Okay. The parking requirements section, this is workshop 3 on parking. The idea with this, coming out of the last workshop, was general acceptance of the types of changes we're looking at, but let's use our next workshop to start putting some numbers in here and start drafting it so that we don't have, once we open a hearing, we don't have a continued and recontinued hearing. So the purpose of this is to confirm that the changes that we're looking at, the numbers specifically, are in the ballpark of what you'd like to see as a hearing. So first issue that we had was commercial parking, and all of it is on this one slide. So when you go through the report, there was the report had samples of the actual amendments to the ordinance that would match up with this. This is more of a overview of it. So the changes that we're suggesting at this point, based on the research we've done and the discussion we had at the last couple of workshops, was to first establish a parking requirement for the anchor tenant. We use that 20,000 square foot threshold, and we would require that the business account for its employee parking. They do get a reduction on the overall square footage because you're talking about a very large store, but there's no employee count loophole under this. So that's the idea on this one. Are there any questions on that one?
Anyone?
The 20,000 square feet, that's the actual usable space of the, each, like here it says, creek size is 25,200, so that's the amount of, rentable space in that shopping center. Is that what that number represents?
It's the specific unit. In this case, it's the specific unit.
Oh, okay.
And I think elsewhere, the square footage refers to gross leasable, not net usable. Any other questions on that one? The next one down, increase the absolute minimum. The absolute minimum was a relatively new code requirement that basically said regardless of whatever reductions you're eligible for, there's an absolute minimum based on square footage that doesn't matter what the uses are, you cannot go below that number. So what we heard after, I think we've only had this in there for a year, what we've heard is that the number is too low. If no one's taking advantage of it, if there's no need for it to be that low, let's raise it to a minimum that everyone is a little bit more comfortable with. So we've looked at, you can kind of see where these numbers fall in terms of the actual square footage. The commission asked us to look at raising these thresholds. So this is what we've done here, is take the 3.4 up to 3.75 and take the one that had been as low as 3.25 up to 3.6. And remember, these are absolute minimums. This is just that minimum threshold so that you don't have any possibility of giving reductions based on uses come too low at any point.
So that means you're requiring kind of like more parking by tweaking those numbers up, correct?
I guess the way I would phrase it is you can't take the uses at a shopping center and reduce based on use so far that a change of use in the future might be problematic. I guess okay. I don't know if that's does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you have any rule of thumb comparison as to what these new changes would due to existing centers? Is that listed in this?
Well, we didn't go, we took some from each size grouping. So we've got the large, the medium, and then the small. The small are not eligible for these types of reductions. So in a way, this table is intended to show that. You can see where these shopping centers would sit at a 15% reduction, where they sit at a 25%. That, if you look at the threshold, if you call the large 50,000 now, you can see where the line goes. If you bring it up to 60, in this particular example, we don't have any in the 50s, but the medium comes up. The threshold of the medium is probably the biggest change out of all these changes listed. This is probably the biggest thing, is that we're bringing that first reduction starts at a much higher threshold than previous.
So, for example, for the Schwinn Crossing Center, based upon the new criteria, what would the number of stalls that were required be versus what it is right now? What would the delta be? Are we talking 5 additional stalls, or is it 20?
They're right now, they're at an actual provided of 272. The 15% reduction on that one gets them to 299 based on the total uses. So that's adding the outlot restaurant, the inline restaurants, and the bank all combined. So they're pretty close to what that would be. Is that what you mean?
No, the changes that we're implementing will impact the number of parking spaces that are required for a given center. So using Schwinn as an example, today, they require some number. What do they require today? 272, or what would the delta based upon these new figures be? I mean, how many roughly are we talking? Is it just a handful? Is it 2 handfuls? 20? Or is it just one?
Schwinn Crossing didn't really change.
Okay.
They didn't move from one category to the other. Their absolute minimum, they were above it. So the actual parking required for them really wouldn't be affected. It would just be that number, the reduction in this case, still be 15%. They would still be in that the medium category.
So how many of our centers would, just for example purposes, would be affected by these changes?
The mediums that are under 40 now, that possibly would have had a reduction applied to them, wouldn't. So what you'd see, most likely what you'll see from this point on is the number of parking variation requests in that size category is probably going to go up. That's the most likely impact, the actual impact that you'll notice as a commission is those, the 30,000 square foot centers more likely to need to come in front of you for a parking variation to take on a restaurant. Which, if you think about that, you're looking at a case-by-case basis. That's the purpose of that variation. That's the reason you take it out of the as of right and put it into the variation, is to just make sure that in that given scenario that it is appropriate in that location to reduce the parking beyond what you've established as being an acceptable reduction.
I don't know, I have a problem with that concept. To me, it's one thing to say, take a look at Fresh Farms 10 years ago when they didn't have very much parking where they needed it, but they had plenty of parking on the property to begin with. And you could say, well, yeah, they could have put a restaurant in, there's more room for parking, it'd be in inconvenient places. But there'd be plenty of room for growth. And you take the same building today that, due to its popularity and success, you know, that using those same formulas, it might not be able to grow that same way. So how do you come up with a good, reasonable baseline that says, and I think we did this a long time ago, right? We built a buffer into the parking calculation that allowed, that planned for potential restaurant uses, planned for growth of maybe certain businesses. You know,
I'm trying to remember the term that we used. It was before my time. I'm trying to remember the term that we used. There was sort of a bank. It wasn't a bank, but it was there was a cache of
exactly, yeah,
unassigned parking space. So there were the ones that were allocated and then the non-allocated.
Right.
And then if you had a new business, it could eat into that
buffer,
that 20 leftovers.
And,
to some extent, you're just playing. At that point, you're just playing with numbers. I mean, you could say the same thing about them in a different way. One of the options that we've also looked at, I don't think I have it in this presentation, but if you recall I think it was the February meeting, we showed examples of how some other towns do it. Northbrook had an example where it was based on the square footage devoted to certain uses. So to simplify their shopping center parking, what they had said was, okay, shopping center up to 100,000 square feet, the whole thing counts at this. If you have more than 10% of the area devoted to restaurants, medical, or other parking intensive uses, then it counts at this. So theirs was simplified in that regard. It probably ends up being very similar numbers, but they sort of took some of the complicated calculation out of it. And they using the bank, the flex bank, using the percent square footage, using this, you end up probably in about the same place. It's just how difficult is it to understand for the businesses, for the shopping center owners. And then what kind of, what's your appetite for variations? How many do you want to see in front of you?
yeah, because, I personally think the good place for variations is when you have a morning type coffee shop and a evening type dinner restaurant, and you say, hey, they will complement each other's parking needs, right? And I'd like to make sure that we consider those kinds of variations, but variations that come in, I don't have any space left in my center, I want to make it a restaurant, so we're just going to ask for an ad hoc variation. That bothers me, because you're taking spaces, potential spaces, away from other business owners. Their business may go down, their businesses may not be as successful as they once were, and I hate to say we're the cause, but we're one of the things that are changing the game rules that they play by. So that's why I really worry a lot about parking and want to make sure that there's plenty of room for businesses to grow, and that there is that buffer, so in case somebody comes in with a special use, that it can fit reasonably well. And I just don't see that sometimes in these figures, and know tangibly how many parking spots does that mean to a Fresh Farms or a Schwinn Crossing what do these changes really give the businesses?
And I think having a regulation that works for large, medium, and small shopping centers, new shopping centers, old shopping centers on a major corridor, it's difficult to write something that's going to work for all of them. I think when you see such a variety of regulations from one town to the next, and we're all, I think, dealing with the same thing. Is how do you not overpark and not underpark? And how do you anticipate new trends in business? It's a difficult thing to come up with. I think the only thing that we haven't really done and applied out to Wheeling, this is all based on more or less what our code is right now. We're not straying from anything. We're changing a couple of numbers here and there. The thing that we haven't done, and I didn't hear a particular desire to do it, would be to take the simplified Northbrook approach of your shopping center is this size, this is your parking requirement, end of story. And we could, that's pretty much the last thing I think we could do. And we couldn't do it for it's difficult to try to calculate it out because you need to know the use, the square footage. It takes a little bit of time to come up with that. But I think from what I heard at the last meeting, this I think at least prevents some of the unintended consequences of our last revisions. I would suggest going with these and maybe looking down the road at flipping the requirement to something different.
It's almost like the old land banking, option that we used for, multifamily and whatnot. I mean, I don't know if we could create something like that in a shopping center. You know what I mean? Without, I just don't know how we would do that. I mean, it's a concept that we've used for other buildings, but would it be feasible or doable in a shopping center?
In terms of having non-allocated spaces or unbuilt spaces?
Well, buildable spaces, but not, in other words, they wouldn't have to build them unless they needed them.
I would guess that a lot of shopping center, if you're talking about a developer of a shopping center, I would guess that they probably want to get out of, the person who's going to manage it and the person who's building it, not usually the same. I could see them just saying, okay, I'm just going to build, if they're talking about having to reserve that space on the site anyway, I would guess that a lot of them probably just build it. I think the question more becomes, and I think maybe the word that was used was reserve parking. So the question is, do you make a shopping center build in a reserve, and how do you phrase it? Right now, the closest thing we have to that is this speculative requirement where we take, the way we came up with that number is we took a look at how shopping centers, tenant mix changes over time, and what's a good number that averages out how the shopping centers ultimately function. And that was where that 5.5 number came from. It allows for some restaurants, but it allows for some retail. So I think, to answer that question, on a new shopping center, we have sort of built in this idea that you have to provide enough parking to allow some change in the tenants over time. But I'm not sure that, I haven't asked a shopping center developer this question, but I'm kind of trying to think of how the builder versus how the manager would work. And I'm guessing they would probably just rather, we're talking 20 spaces, I think they'd probably just rather build it and be done.
Right. So what you're proposing is to go with this here right now?
This would be my
Right now.
suggestion.
Let's see what everybody else has to say. Commissioner Dorban?
Nothing, thank you.
I see no problem with this.
It's a start.
Yep.
Definitely start.
Commissioner Schaaf?
I think it's,
All right. Good. And then we can revisit.
Yeah.
I think,
That's what we're
like
here
I said,
for.
I think the next step to this would be
Public hearing.
a simplify, with the next step to this, if, beyond this public hearing, a year from now, do we try to simplify it?
Sure. Let's see what happens. We have to start somewhere, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess the interesting thing, that specifically for Schwinn Crossing, right? They have so many, almost every business in that center is a restaurant, except for a couple of the big anchor tenants, right? There are a lot of
A lot of the restaurants, yeah.
restaurants, and
Physically separated from one another.
one restaurant that doesn't even have any seats, right? But probably is one of the biggest draws.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, it's a good example, and it's also a tricky example because of the asphalt next to it that everybody knows is used. Are we okay to move to multifamily?
Move the multifamily.
Moving to the next section, multifamily parking. I'm going to move quickly through some of the information that we've already given in past workshops. I left a lot of it in for the purposes of a discussion if there are questions. The goals of this, our staff had felt that there was a barrier to the development of multifamily housing in our parking requirement. We wanted to research it, explore it, and we had at the last two workshops made recommendations to level the playing field, so to speak, among the adjacent municipalities. If we find that Wheeling has had a lack of construction of a certain housing type, and other towns have seen an increase in that, we want to look at why that is. And this was our idea that maybe it was due to our higher parking requirement specifically for this type of housing. So the commission asked us to look at developments in other municipalities, talk to the municipalities, try to come up with a more accurate picture of the demand for parking. And then based on the last February meeting, we were asked to draft some amendments for the purpose of discussion. So that is where we are. A lot of this is from the last, I'm going to just flip through it. We looked at other municipalities, we talked to the towns, we talked to not shopping center, we talked to some apartment building managers to see how their experience was with their parking. Was it enough? Was it not enough? We moved from that into trying to determine actual demand. This was through observation at different housing developments. We started to look at this in terms also of just statistically speaking, how many vehicles do people have in this area? We came away with this. We came up with a couple of high and low projections using on the high side how many driving age people would you see in this housing type. So we're looking at efficiency, multifamily, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 or more bedroom. And this is based on thousands and thousands and thousands of suburban Chicago developments, what the actual population is ultimately once you build housing like this. So we kind of set this as our reasonable worst case scenario of how many driving age people you would have in a given unit. We also looked at the vehicle ownership rates for suburban Chicago as another number. You don't want to find yourself below the average vehicle ownership. This is a little bit misleading, again, because we were talking about all housing types for this one. This is based specifically on this housing type. We, since the last workshop, we've tried to come up with a number, as I said, and apply it to developments. We carried through some of the developments from other towns that we had used in previous examples. We also added a few new developments from Wheeling so that we could have things that we're also familiar with. One of the points I wanted to make before we get into that is this, just to reemphasize we have not had a multifamily building built since this code requirement was adopted. So you're looking at taking the current code, and this is the reason you'll see this number, current code, is higher than actual number of stalls for every single development. Obviously, the ones outside of Wheeling aren't under this code, but the ones in Wheeling are all pre-2005. Let's see. So we've got a series of charts here where we're attempting to illustrate code versus actual, and then we throw in the next few charts, we start adding another line for a potential new code. So we looked at these 5 developments: Park Point, Winbrook, which is up on Deerfield Road by the Deerfield Road? Right north of the Buffalo Grove train station. Foxborough, the Green at Chevy Chase, and Woodland Creek. Woodland Creek, as we talked about at the last workshop, we used Woodland Creek 2 ways, with its actual parking, and then we took away the unused indoor parking. They have indoor parking available, and it's seasonally used because the residents can choose to rent it by month. They don't choose to rent it except in the winter, and in the winter, only 40% of it gets rented out. So we took out 60% of their parking just to try to project a more accurate picture of the demand. So as you can see on each one of these, the current code is substantially higher than the actual number of stalls, and none of these developments report a problem with parking. The staff report, the staff memo that you have uses this requirement. This 1.5 for everything up to 1 bedroom and 2 per unit beyond that. Again, this was based on the research that we presented at the last workshop. We just thought that this was interesting, partially because the similarity between the actual count and this projected requirement based on 1.5 and 2, going back to a bedroom-based requirement. We had a bedroom-based requirement prior to 2005. We went to a flat requirement at that point. But if you reintroduce some sort of bedroom-based requirement, these 2 numbers end up being very similar.
Except the Foxborough, which would concern me,
And Park Point.
and Park Point. Because Foxborough is an apartment complex. And to reduce that from, it's like 700 down to 600, that's 100 stalls. That's a lot.
It is a lot. It is, there's no, unlike Woodland Creek and the Green and Winbrook, where we have a pretty good idea of exactly how many cars are there. Foxborough, we don't know exactly what their usage is. That's something we can find out. I don't know that again, this is the actual number of spaces.
Right.
The usage at Foxborough may be lower. And again, this is sort of the starting point of this discussion, this using a bedroom-based lower requirement. This is what it looks like. And I think if I move to the next few, it'll kind of help with this issue.
Okay.
Park Point, again, has indoor parking. We don't know to what extent it's used. I would suspect it's probably, the number of spaces is pretty similar to the number of units, probably a good bet in that case because it's a condo development that people have purchased it and didn't have the option of necessarily separating it out from their purchase. So it's probably got a higher usage than Woodland Creek where they were allowed to separate it out.
Some of these apartment complexes have a lot of business vehicles there too. The guys that are driving limos or taxis or doing siding, they're filling up those parking lots as well, besides having, I assume, their own personal car. I see trailers parked in there.
Some of the rental developments that we've talked to that have, the 1 and 2 bedroom units, a lot of them have restrictions. Woodland Creek has a restriction on the number of vehicles you're allowed to have, so they control it that way. I don't know. I don't have any data on
like Woodland Creek, but I know Foxborough and some of the ones up on McHenry, like
I
Pine
don't
Hill.
have any data at all on those. I would have to ask them specifically how they deal with it and if they have a lease restriction. I just don't know. Yeah, she was just saying that those developments also have more parking available. They have a larger number of stalls. And I would imagine if there was a major problem from the leasing side that they would restrict them. But again, I'm just speculating. So this next layer adds a slightly higher requirement. This purple one here is taking this 1.5 and 2 and just shifting it up. So this is a 1.7 and 2.2, and obviously it's going to be a larger number. But the idea of this one is if these two numbers, the actual and the 1.5 and 2 are too similar, and there's a concern that there wouldn't be any cushion at all, this number is your cushion. This is taking up to a 1.7 and a 2.2 is more of a cushion on your parking. The next one, are there any questions on this one?
Does that also include the 10% for visitors or?
This one, these numbers have the visitor parking built into it.
Okay.
So in this case, because we're basing it on the units, like for instance, Woodland Creek and Chevy Chase, their 1.7 to 2.2 is higher than their actual right now.
That's correct.
Whereas, and Winbrook, whereas Park Point and Foxborough are lower.
Yeah, in this one, Foxborough, you're seeing it catch up. Foxborough, these, I don't have it set where these are live, so I can't see the numbers. But
Yeah,
I think if we go back to that first one, you start to see this catch up to the actual Foxborough 723, actual 750.
Okay. Okay.
And again, we were trying to pick places that are not the same. Foxborough doesn't have a similar layout to Woodland Creek. Woodland Creek has elevators, Foxborough doesn't. There are differences in the two developments. So the idea of this next one is using that same 1.7 and the 2.2. So it's using the one that's got a little buffer built into it. The difference on this one is that it treats small complexes and large complexes differently. One of the things, and this is just, again, speculation, one of the things that we, I think in Wheeling, have to look at is the lack of public parking and street parking. So there's no, these vehicles aren't going to get absorbed by the street if they have to be parked on site. So the issue that you run into with a 6, 7, 8, 10 unit building is that if 2 or 3 units end up with more than the average number of cars, what happens? So what this does is it, kind of like with the shopping centers, the larger the shopping center, you start to see people come and go, and there's more parking available as people file in and out. That's applying sort of the same principle to a multifamily development. That a larger complex is probably statistically more likely to behave like the average. If you have an anomaly on a small building, you could potentially see a scenario where there isn't enough parking, but over the average of 1,000 units, you're very likely to be able to absorb a couple of units with one extra car. So that is what this one shows then, is that once you have a certain threshold, I think we used 100 parking stalls. So once your building is large enough that you need 100 parking stalls, you can start reducing the parking from that point. I believe we used a 10% reduction for the larger buildings or larger complexes. Any comments, questions, suggestions?
So what are you looking to us to do?
I think what I'd like to get at this point is comfort level. My suggestion on this is that it is very likely that the parking requirement for multifamily buildings is contributing to a lack of interest in construction. It's a contributing factor. I'm sure it's not the only thing, availability of sites, site constraints, floodplain regulations, that sort of thing. But I think to put this into real world terms, the amount of land that we're talking about on some of these, the difference between this number and this number is 4 acres. It's 4 acres of parking. So that's significant. So what's the trade-off? Somebody's not going to have to buy 4 acres. They're going to cut the units. They're not going to buy the land. I mean, if you don't see construction at a time where other people are seeing construction, I think it makes sense for us to take a look at this. Exactly what the right number is, I think, is a question. I think going back to a bedroom-based probably makes some sense based on what we've seen. I think we're over, and I don't think it's necessarily producing a result. The higher parking requirement, I don't think is helping us achieve anything at this point.
And are you looking at taking out then the covered parking for multifamily, all other?
All of these scenarios have a zero covered parking. And again, this gets back to this issue of competitive disadvantage. It's not a common requirement. We didn't find a single other town that requires it. It's very expensive. I think we'd illustrated with, in the last one, we had this hypothetical building that's being built under Wheeling code versus an adjacent town's code, and it was a couple $1 million more expensive to build if you calculate extra surface parking and extra covered parking. Yes.
Let's see if I can be frank, okay? Many a year ago, I think there was an objective of the village to say that we had enough multifamily entities in town, and we wanted to spur the development of single-family houses, and we're pushing to go in that direction. Maybe as the result of that, these rates were raised to levels to dissuade developers from coming in and developing those kinds of entities to try to promote the other kind of single-family, whatever, housing. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that one can use these figures to say, like you said, we're not getting our fair share of multifamily development. They're going to other places. My question to you is that what we want in town? And if it is what we want in town, then we can adjust these figures because they sure do appear to be out of the ordinary and maybe not contributing to development. But back then, that might have been the reason that they are what they are.
Biggest change to the zoning requirements in Wheeling in the last 10 years, there's probably two of them. Probably this requirement and the adoption of mixed-use zoning districts. Those two things contradict each other. So what we did was we created, this is just my opinion, for what it's worth. We created acres and acres of land where we encouraged a particular housing type and simultaneously discouraged it from being developed. Again, there are many contributing factors. It's difficult to develop in a floodplain. A lot of our MXT is also floodplain. It's difficult to develop when you have limited traffic, limited access to streets. If you compound that with also requiring more parking than people demand, I think, based on what we've seen, that it certainly has had an impact. The question of vision, I think, is fair. I think that's exactly the kind of thing that the Plan Commission should be looking at. My assessment of that, though, would be if the intention of the MX district is to be denser multifamily housing and office residential retail, then it is you're moving against that effort to also make that type of housing more difficult to build.
But doesn't the MX district also have in and of itself a big negative in that the T section of that really doesn't exist, right? We don't have good train service. We don't have good public transportation amenities in town. We'd like to, but they're not there.
It's, if you want to look at the differences between the town centers of the area, that's a big topic. There's a lot that goes into what makes downtown Mount Prospect different from the area here: age of the service, frequency of service, existence of a street grid prior to the date of the vision for the town center. There's a lot of things. I'm not saying that this is the reason. I'm suggesting that it's a contributing factor. And if you have, like we do now, the time to take a look at something and make an adjustment, I think it's a good thing for the commission to take a look at. Again, the exact number, what we're doing is trying to do our best to bring the code to a place where it matches the demand. Not go beyond that, certainly, but trying to bring it down to where you take this part, this area here, but between this line and this line, is disincentive to development. And I think if you take that out, you're still left with amply parked multifamily buildings.
So,
I agree. I think, it's really obvious that we're kind of way out of line here.
Yeah.
but, and I would agree, but the underlying item here is you're taking out the covered parking. Right?
That's an additional piece of this that we haven't really discussed much, but
Right.
yes.
Yeah. So on this piece specifically, are you looking at direction from us as to which one of these bars we should follow or make, change our code to?
So what I would ask for tonight is, if we're going to publish a public hearing with the
Have a
intention-
consensus as where we're going?
Just, not necessarily, this is it, let's do it right now. This number, there's a couple, Ms. Jones and I have looked at a couple of different ways of arriving at these same numbers. And part of what we're trying to figure out is, what is, if this is more or less, you want a little bit of buffer, if that's more or less where we're heading, there's a couple of different ways you can write it. We didn't get into it too much for the purpose of the presentation. Like Commissioner Johnson said, does it include the guest parking or not? You could write this in such a way that the guest parking is explicitly not included, and then add it back on, just say each unit has, X number of guest parking spaces associated with it. So what we were trying to get is, is there consensus is the 1.5 and 2 looking too close for comfort? Is the larger number more comfortable? Is the larger number fine, reduced for the very large complexes and still providing the sort of safety zone for the smaller complexes? With that, I think we could put together a public hearing for you.
Got it.
What's different at Park Point that no matter what we do, we don't get up to
Where they're at now?
where they're actually at?
They have, I think, we can go back and double check this, but I think they have, it's possible they may even have more than one indoor space per unit.
More than what?
It's possible they may have more than one indoor space per unit.
They have a lot of indoor parking.
Oh, do they? Okay.
I'm just looking at the number, I'm guessing that's
But see, a
probably what it is.
complex like that, I would still demand indoor parking.
You would still do what?
Demand indoor parking at a complex like that.
I agree.
So let's separate these two things. Everyone, we've got these options here. And can I make an assumption that our current code, we'd want to change our current code?
Yes.
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 Okay, so the red bar is out. Okay, so the question is, do we want to go with the 1.5 to 2? And this is so they can formulate a code. 1.5 to 2, 1.7 to 22, or 1.7 to 22 with a 90% reduction. Okay,
10% reduction.
10%, I'm sorry, ooh, 90% reduction. 10% reduction.
Yeah, read that one close before
Yeah,
you.
really, yeah, put that one in there. So, let's hear some comment.
Purple. I like the purple one.
You like the purple one, the 1.7 to 22.
I agree. I like the purple also.
It seems more reasonable.
No reduction.
It's a good start.
Yeah.
I'm okay with the reduction, but the purple's fine too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm leaning towards the
I agree
10%
too.
reduction, but the purple one would be okay with me also.
I think so, yeah.
So I have a follow-up question to that. If the general consensus is toward the 1.7 and the 2.2, there's some, it seems like there is some desire for the reduction.
Yes.
Is it Would there be a desire from the commission, we had talked at the last meeting, although the MXT, we all understand that people will own vehicles here, regardless of whether or not the train is there. If they take the train, they're still going to have a car. Is that 10% reduction something worth exploring for the MXT alone? Or is the 1722 across the board and let the PUD fall as it may?
I think that if you look at Woodland Creek, right, I mean, that is a monstrous complex. And I think the concept of a reduction for a monstrous complex is probably a reasonable concept. The question is, where do you draw that cutoff boundary? You know what I mean?
So that's,
And
yeah.
MXT, just because it's an MXT doesn't
Right. I don't think we have enough
do anything
experience.
for it. You
I
know,
don't think we have enough experience, so,
over
not
2,000
the-
units, maybe, you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not until the train service expands and,
right?
Yeah,
So go with the 1722.
Yep.
And if somebody builds in the MXT, and they have a rationale for a reduction, they can propose it as part of their PUD.
Yes. Yep.
However, I would like to discuss the covered parking concept, because
That's going to be my next question.
That's the next question.
The covered parking concept. So there's a couple different ways that you can approach the covered parking. The current code, of course, is a one-to-one on the covered parking. And it's covered. It's not necessarily garaged. The only one that I believe uses the word garage is senior housing. I think the other covered parking is just covered. So the question I would have, first of all, would be consensus on dropping it altogether or not, or keeping it in some way. If there's a desire to keep it, then I've got some ideas of how to keep it.
Do any other municipalities have covered parking? And typically, I mean, hypothetical, how much additional would it add to the cost of a property if we required covered parking?
I don't know if I may have thrown that slide in here again, in case that question came up. It was, I don't see it. It was.
Just like rough guess.
We took, I think the last one we had that covered and structured. So carports are less expensive than a garage. So the carport, we had an $800,000 addition in a hypothetical, what do we use, a 50-unit building? 100-unit building. So it was a 100-unit building. It cost, at a one-to-one, it cost about $800,000 extra to build that. I want to say it was $2.6 million to garage it on a 100-unit building. Glad you remembered that.
It was a big difference.
I think I still have it on my,
The one, I had just one other point I wanted to make on that. There is nothing that is going to prevent someone from building it if they believe that is the appropriate thing to do for their, the examples that we've talked about that have covered parking, I believe all of them did it prior to being required by the code.
I can't, personally, I wouldn't want to take that chance.
And that's fine. And that's kind of what I'm looking for is
And
the consensus here.
so what Andrew is looking for is a consensus as to what, he needs to look at the amendment to somehow put in there covered parking, or however we want to do it. And I think and you said it, that you want you want covered parking for some type of developments, right? Commissioner Johnson? What we're looking for is a consensus as to whether they need to investigate the need for covered parking for certain types of development.
well, I think the one shot you had up here before said townhomes would have covered parking, because most of them
Yes.
have at least a single
This
car garage.
Townhome requirement is not being
But
touched.
a
by
condo
this.
complex, I would not want to see a condo complex personally, without underground parking. That's my opinion. Because, for instance, we have apartment developments that converted to condos, and they just have outdoor parking, and to me, that's not a selling point. If they're trying to sell units, that's not a selling point in my eyes. Commissioner Steinle?
I agree with your thoughts.
Commissioner Powers?
Not sure. Yeah, of course, it's nice to have someplace to park your car, but maybe some people are trying to save money and they don't want that option. I don't know. It's tough.
The problem with that is, if you don't have some kind of underground parking, you're now taking up ground space. Now, is that really what we want to do? And maybe with underground parking, at least you're allowing more green space. And it makes the complex more attractive and certainly more interesting for people to want to live there. So I see your point, but, there are places where they have one covered parking space and they don't care to use it. They can rent it out. They can rent their spaces out if they don't want to.
Right.
If they're trying to save money.
And exactly, and I think that's the type of, in a condo situation, personally, that's the type of complex that I want to see in the village, in a condo development.
If I could interject one thing on the condo versus non-condo, I don't think we're legally going to be able to distinguish based on type of ownership. So some things that you could consider would be just keeping it in across the board and allow for a variation. You could consider some of the other ideas that I was just jotting down. Instead of a 1-to-1, have a different ratio, and then let people buy them if they want them or not.
Andrew, are you saying that if somebody wanted to build an apartment building versus a multi-story condo building, that we cannot differentiate between
I don't
the two?
think that in your code you can identify a type of ownership or a type of tenancy as requiring something different than another type.
Because what happens if they start out as apartments and go condo?
That's the problem, yeah.
That is the problem.
They got to dig underneath their building?
So then I would go down the path of still keeping it in there and going with variations.
So the other option I had jotted down was do it as an incentive. It sounds like there's consensus to not do that, but requiring it at a 1-to-1, requiring it at less than 1-to-1, and then doing it as an incentive where you allow them to reduce overall parking if they elected to do the covered parking. So those were the three things that I was coming up with.
The incentive doesn't really float my boat either.
But again, we're the only municipality around that requires it.
Couldn't find, not just around, I don't think I could.
In the world. In the
We're
world?
unique. It's unique.
You have a landscape plan from Australia, see what they're doing there?
Look how far he went for that.
Yeah, look how far you went for that. Did you check? And they park on the wrong side, so.
I did park on the wrong side when I went to Australia to grab their landscape plan.
Right.
And this is kind of like an all or nothing proposition, right? Either everybody has it or everybody doesn't. You
Well, no,
can't
they
have
can ask-
people that want it and then some that don't want it.
No, they can ask for a variation. Yeah. I was, when I came in here tonight, I was leaning more towards getting out of our code, but I'm of the opinion that we need to keep it in there. And I think the board as a consensus is too.
So the consensus is keep it in as it's currently written. The word covered, are everyone's okay with it being a carport, or do we need it to be garaged?
Yeah, I don't like carport. I never have. I always thought it should be garaged or underground.
Then you're just driving the cost even higher.
Yep.
Well, to me, it
And that
depends-
red bar is gonna
And
still be
again, it
up there.
depends upon,
it depends upon your definition of what carport is. If it's just 4 posts and a plexiglass cover,
that-
then I'd say no. But if it's something that looks reasonably nice and,
right. I've seen apartment complexes that have, garages that are detached as, and for rent. So, yeah, really. Can we get some more definition around carport? Give us
Yeah,
some,
I
give us some
think that-
options there.
the definition of what a carport
Yeah,
is.
give us some
could really
options
help.
there that we could select. Okay, cool.
I
You
just
know,
feel like
maybe
we're,
individually separated or,
I feel like we're still tying the hands of any developer for, when places like Woodland Creek can't even rent their spots. They only rent 40% during the winter. People are preferring to park outside. That's a lot of wasted space that they had to pay for.
and what is the construction of their outside, or
Their-
their covered parking? What is,
All of their covered parking is
Underground.
under the building, it's basement.
right, so I mean, you're talking very high price point parking, right?
Right.
If you allow that to be lowered a little bit,
Why don't we get some definitions around that?
Okay.
If you could do that.
I can do that.
Thank you.
But as of right now, if we bring this back for a public hearing, what we'd like to see is a one-to-one with carport garage to be
Yep.
determined.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
The consensus was one-to-one. Are we,
One-to-one meaning again?
One,
If you have a
one's-
50-unit building, you have to provide 50 to
Yeah, one space for every unit has to be covered.
Yes.
be covered.
Yep. That's what it is now, right?
Yes.
that's what it currently,
so if we're shooting for the purple, we're saying the one of the 1.7 has to be covered.
Covered.
And the 0.7 can be
Right.
Right.
So get that,
outside.
The
Right.
worst-case scenario is they can come back for a variation,
Right.
correct?
yeah, I mean, that's
yep,
that's what has happened thus far.
Yep.
And that's what would happen.
definitely. So do you have clear direction on the parking requirements? Great.
Miraculously.
I'm glad you do.
Pretty clear.
Pretty clear.
Is that clear as mud, or?
The next item is the outdoor dining requirements.
I don't know if we actually, let's see,
You had the,
it's hiding in here somewhere.
yeah, it is.
H3, yeah.
This one I think should be relatively short. The request from the commission was to try to figure out a way to reduce some of the burden to a business who would like to provide outdoor parking. We've swapped out the, at minimum, site plan and appearance review with staff administrative approval, provided that it meets certain criteria and doesn't have permanent features. So if it's outside of this criteria, either for size or for having some other feature that's permanent, it requires new patios and new walls, new things that would require site plan review anyway. Anything that meets the criteria, administrative, otherwise it comes back for review. Paired with that, we took the language from the parking table out. I can't read it at this size. So we reference back, instead of having the requirement here, we reference back to this, this other section here. This was instead of I kind of took a couple of comments as consensus to try to write something down. I didn't hear any disagreement the last time we talked about this, but the idea was, this came during the Little Caesars discussion, what if you want to put a bench out there or something? So this is intended to allow some amount of outdoor seating, even for places that are considered to be carry-out.
Any comments?
So 8 seats in this particular, 8 outdoor seats would normally be 2 parking spaces roughly? Do we do 3 or?
It would go to 3. It would get lumped in with the carry-out requirement of 5 and the employee parking. So it would probably end up being a net 3, but seasonal still.
I mean, I'd like to promote outdoor seating if at all possible. This seems like a reasonable way to do it.
Commissioner Schaaf?
Yeah, I don't see any, the need for too much additional parking for outdoor seating. It's seasonal.
Right.
And I don't see people going to some place just because they have outdoor seating. I would like to see outdoor seating,
But I mean, it's just
oh, are we gone?
a convenience item for the people that eat, rather than eating indoors. you
Right,
might,
they eat outdoors.
Eat outdoors.
And in addition, I was thinking of, our restaurateurs, they would have to schedule a meeting to come in front of us to get outdoor seating, and I'm trying to make that, I think, that was my I brought this up, this was one of the things I was on my list, was to make it easier for them to be able to turn that around and get it done, so.
Maybe the only thing that I would, and I'll ask you if you think it's necessary, with outdoor seating probably comes outdoor refuse additions and stuff like that. Should we build that in, or would that be
It's right there.
automatic?
It's right there.
It's right there.
Oh,
We have it
okay.
in the current code.
So, Commissioner Dorban, you okay?
Okay.
Commissioner Powers?
Yep, fine.
Johnson? Okay, good, go for it.
Then,
Before we start the next, are you going to go on to the next one?
I was,
Well, the next one, review of land use applications. I don't know if everybody has seen the agenda for the board meeting on Monday night, but we have looks like we're going to have a new board member shortly. And to me, this is one of the most, I thought, from a workshop perspective, something that was not least important, but a lot of people had some questions on this one. So I'm going to ask the board if we could defer this until we have our new member on, or do we want to start some discussion tonight? I just think it would be important, for him or her, I don't know who it is, to,
Great learning experience.
yeah, it would be a great learning experience. So if everybody is okay with that,
I'm fine with
to
that.
defer
Yes,
that?
sir.
Okay. Okay. It's just that one struck me as, as reviewing it, it's got a lot of piece parts.
that's
So,
fine.
okay. So that's all we had from your other business,
That is it?
correct?
Correct.
Okay. So let's go to other, and thank you for indulging me in that. I think it'll be good for the new board member, and we'll schedule that as soon as we get an opening in June, probably, right? If we can get it in June, that'd be great. Okay, good. Other business, Commissioner Schaaf.
Nothing?
Commissioner Powers?
Nothing.
Commissioner Stylin?
I'd like to ask a question. Andrew, I think over the last few months, we were supposed to give you certain pieces of information on a variety of topics. Just wonder if we had done that.
Has anybody?
No. maybe a follow-up list on what we owe you in terms of
Signs?
information, comments, whatever.
I think this priority list was, I think.
One of them, right.
Probably the biggest one.
Right.
The other thing that we had been asked to put together was the sign and appearance awards. It didn't make it onto the priority list. I don't know if that's because there was an assumption that it was happening anyway.
My guess is that it was an assumption that it was going to happen anyway, and that was probably me forgetting it also. So I think we've got to get that. We've got it in our minutes for today that we were looking for signs for our appearance, sign award and also appearance, correct?
That was what we had talked about. We did not receive enough nominations to put something together.
I don't think, did you receive any?
We received a few.
Okay, so let's because I know I didn't send any in. So let's do that. So, good point. You know, I thought about it today when I saw that sign from the one we approved today, Party Fantasy. So,
Nominee?
Any other things that we owe you that?
Nothing comes to mind right now. No, I think that that would be it. We
Okay.
did take care of these priority lists
Right.
items. So
Well, and now we owe them the landscape bits and pieces. that we'd like to
yes,
see.
right. The landscape bits and pieces, exactly. Okay, good.
Might be nice for us to have a to-do list that we need
Yeah,
to
I know.
fulfill for Andrew.
Right, exactly. So, anything else, Commissioner?
No, that's it, thank you.
Commissioner Johnson?
Nothing.
Commissioner Durbin?
Nothing.
I have one item, and I think I may have brought this up before. The daycare center on McHenry Road, the castle. The dead shrubs on the, I'm going to say the south side. Okay. No, I'm sorry. Let's see, it faces north, so it would be the east side.
The east side.
East side, the east side. A lot of dead shrubs there, a lot of dead shrubs.
And parkway trees seem to still be missing on that.
There's two of them there on the east side, but there's a lot of blank space.
north.
That's on the north side. The parkway trees are on the north side.
On the roadside.
On the road side.
Pick one. It's
Right.
diagonal.
So if you're facing the building to the left, on the outside of the fence, there's a lot of dead shrubbery.
I noticed those when I was driving by, I think yesterday, and they do look like they were the ones that were recently planted.
Gosh, I hope not, because they didn't get a good deal on those.
By recent, I mean the ones that they put in intentionally on the outside of the fence. What we'll double check and make sure that those are theirs and not the adjacent.
Okay, whatever, they need to be replaced.
Okay.
Okay. And that's all I had. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Oops. Adjourned.